Commander Tahoe Park set his coffee mug down on the worn metal table of his outpost kitchen. The small station, located on the edge of Earth's territorial space, had been his home for 3 years, since retirement from the Space Force. He preferred the quiet isolation to the chaos of Earth's overcrowded cities. Out here, among the stars, he answered to no one. The morning followed its usual routine. Systems check, perimeter scan, and breakfast, while reviewing astronomical data. Tahoe had just begun analyzing an unusual radiation pattern when the proximity alarm blared through the outpost. Unidentified spacecraft approaching. Configuration unknown. Impact trajectory detected. Tahoe grabbed his sidearm and emergency kit, rushing to the observation deck. Through the reinforced windows, he spotted it. A sleek, silver vessel with an unusual blue glow emanating from its propulsion system. The ship was clearly damaged, trailing wisps of luminescent energy as it made an emergency descent toward the small landing platform adjacent to his outpost. Computer, defensive posture alpha. Prepare medical bay for possible casualties. The ship touched down hard, skidding across the platform before coming to rest against the safety barriers. Steam and coolant vapor billowed from its damaged hull. Tahoe watched cautiously, weapon ready, as a section of the hull slid open. A figure emerged from the mist, stumbling down the exit ramp. Tahoe's breath caught in his throat. The visitor was unmistakably female, but definitely not human. Her skin was a pale turquoise with intricate luminescent markings flowing along her exposed arms. Her features were almost human-like, but with larger, almond-shaped eyes that shimmered with an iridescent quality. She wore what appeared to be a formal diplomatic uniform, now torn and stained. When she spotted Tahoe, she hurried toward him with surprising speed, clutching what looked like an official seal in her hand. "Earthman, thank the celestial stars I found you," she called out in perfect, accented English. "I need your help immediately." Tahoe kept his weapon lowered but ready. "Identify yourself and state your purpose." The alien woman straightened her posture, making an obvious effort to compose herself despite her distress. "I am Hannah, Senior Diplomatic Envoy of the Stellarian Confederation. I apologize for my unexpected arrival, but this is an emergency of the highest order." "What kind of emergency requires crash landing at a private outpost?" Tahoe asked, still suspicious. Hannah's markings pulsed with what seemed to be anxiety. "I need a husband. Immediately." Tahoe blinked, certain he had misheard. "Excuse me." "A husband. A mate. A partner." She stepped closer, her large eyes pleading. "Or more precisely, I need someone to pretend to be my husband for 3 Earth days." Despite himself, Tahoe laughed. "Is this some kind of joke? Did Jai-1 put you up to this?" His old Space Force buddy had always been one for elaborate pranks. "I assure you, this is no joke." Hannah's voice took on a desperate edge. "The Galactic Summit begins tomorrow on Stellaris Prime. I am my family's representative, tasked with finalizing a peace treaty between 12 star systems. My intended mate, who would have accompanied me, has vanished without explanation." She held up the diplomatic seal, which projected a holographic display of official-looking documents. In Stellarian culture, unmarried diplomats cannot represent their houses at formal negotiations. It is seen as a sign of instability and untrustworthiness. If I appear without a mate, my family loses everything. Our standing, our voice in the Confederation, and the peace treaty will likely collapse. Tahoe crossed his arms. "That sounds like your problem, not mine. I'm not interested in alien politics. The treaty being negotiated affects Earth's outer colonies directly," Hannah countered quickly. "The Kashian Empire has been pushing for restrictions on human expansion. Without proper representation supporting Earth's allies, your people could lose access to 3 major trade routes and 5 resource-rich systems." That caught Tahoe's attention. He'd fought against Kashian aggression during his final years of service. The thought of them gaining political advantage made his jaw clench. "Why me? There must be others better suited for this." charade. Hannah's markings dimmed slightly. My ship was damaged evading a caution patrol. Your outpost was the only safe landing option within range. And, she hesitated, humans and Stellarians share enough physiological similarities to make our pairing believable to most species. Tahoe sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. Let me understand this. You want me to abandon my outpost, travel to your homeworld, and pretend to be your husband for a diplomatic summit that could impact Earth's future. Yes. Hannah nodded eagerly. Just 3 Earth days. I can have you back here by the 4th morning. All you need to do is stand beside me, follow basic protocols, and appear devoted. I will handle all diplomatic matters. And if I refuse? Hannah's shoulders slumped. Then I must report my failure to my house. The summit will proceed without Stellarian support for Earth's position, and my family's standing, built over 7 generations, will be destroyed. Tahoe walked to the window, looking out at the stars. He had come here to escape responsibilities, to live in peaceful isolation. And yet here was trouble, literally crash landing at his doorstep. 3 days, he finally said, turning back to face her. Not 1 hour more. And I set boundaries on this pretense. Relief washed over Hannah's face, her markings glowing brighter. Thank you, Earthman. You have saved more than you know. Tahoe. Commander Tahoe Park. Commander Park. She performed a formal gesture, touching her forehead, and then extending her hand. My ship requires minor repairs before we can depart. We should leave within 3 hours to reach the summit on time. As Tahoe gathered his things, he wondered what he had just committed to. Something told him this would be far more complicated than a 3-day charade. Tahoe stared at the sleek interior of Hannah's ship with undisguised amazement. Unlike the bulky, utilitarian Earth vessels he had commanded, her diplomatic cruiser resembled an elegant living space that happened to travel through space. Crystal-like panels pulsed with gentle light, and the control systems responded to touch and thought rather than switches and buttons. Your technology is impressive, he admitted as Hannah guided the ship away from his outpost. This is an older diplomatic vessel, she replied, her fingers dancing across the luminescent controls. Not nearly as advanced as our military ships. Once they entered hyperspace, Hannah turned her full attention to preparing Tahoe for what lay ahead. She projected a holographic display showing various alien species and diplomatic protocols. We have 20 hours before arrival. That gives us just enough time to cover the essentials, she explained. First, we need to establish our story. How we met, our courtship, why a Stellarian would bond with a human. Tahoe frowned. Is that unusual? Not unprecedented, but rare enough to draw attention. Hannah's markings flickered with what he was beginning to recognize as thoughtfulness. Perhaps we met during peace negotiations following the Kashin conflict. You were a military commander. I was a junior diplomat. Our professional relationship evolved into something more. Simple enough to remember, Tahoe agreed. What else do I need to know? Hannah rose from her seat and approached him. The greeting between bonded pairs requires our third fingers to touch like this. She demonstrated by extending her slender hand, third finger slightly raised. Tahoe awkwardly mimicked her movement, noticing how her skin seemed to shimmer at the point of contact. Your fingers lack our bioluminescence, but that's expected for a human, she said. Now, when we enter formal gatherings, you'll walk 1 step behind me, as is traditional for warrior mates. Warrior mates. Tahoe raised an eyebrow. In our culture, pairs are categorized by their societal roles. As a military commander paired with a diplomat, you would be considered my warrior mate, protector and physical strength to complement my political position. For the next several hours, Hannah drilled Tahoe on Stellarian customs, table manners, and political factions. He learned that direct eye contact was reserved for equals and challenges, that eating required specific utensils for different food groups, and that the 12 systems participating in the summit had complex, often contentious relationships. The Kashians are the most problematic, Hannah explained, showing him images of tall, ridge-headed humanoids with mottled gray skin. They've been expanding aggressively for decades. Earth's resistance 5 years ago was the first serious setback to their plans. Tai-Ho nodded. I remember. We lost good people stopping their incursion at Proxima Centauri. Which is why they'll be watching you closely, Hana warned. They may try to provoke you into showing disrespect, which would undermine our position. As the ship dropped out of hyperspace for a navigation check, Tai-Ho moved to the viewing port. The stars stretched before them, brilliant and strange. This region of space was unfamiliar to him, far beyond Earth's normal travel routes. Will your people really believe we're actually married? He asked, still gazing outward. Hana joined him at the port. Most Stellarians have never met humans except in formal diplomatic settings. They'll have no basis for comparison. But the Kashian delegation is suspicious by nature. They employ empaths who can sense emotional states. So they'll know we're lying, Tai-Ho said grimly. Not necessarily. Empaths detect emotions, not thoughts. If we project the right feelings, respect, familiarity, protective instinct, they won't detect deception. Hana hesitated before adding, it would help if you didn't think of this as lying, but as performing a role with conviction. Tai-Ho turned to face her. And what emotion should a devoted husband project toward his wife? Something in his tone made Hana's markings pulse more rapidly. Admiration, protectiveness, physical awareness without inappropriate display. Stellarian bonds are based on complementary strengths, not the romantic love humans often portray. That makes it easier, I suppose, Tai-Ho said with a slight smile. The ship re-entered hyperspace with a gentle hum. Hana used the remaining travel time to help Tai-Ho practice proper greetings for each delegation and fit him with appropriate attire. A formal suit that combined Earth military styling with Stellarian color patterns and materials. When Tai-Ho emerged from the changing area, Hana studied him with an appraising eye. The uniform suits you. You look distinguished. Before he could respond, the ship's systems announced their approach to Stellaris Prime. Through the main viewport, Tai-Ho caught his first glimpse of Hana's homeworld, a planet of sweeping oceans and land masses covered in what appeared to be crystal forests. Most striking were the cities, vast structures that seemed to grow organically from the landscape, shimmering with the same bioluminescence as Hana's skin markings. It's beautiful, he said honestly. Thank you. Pride colored her voice. The central diplomatic complex is there. She pointed to a particularly impressive structure rising from a coastal region. That's where the summit will be held. As they began their descent, Hana's expression grew serious. There's one more thing you should know. The summit doesn't just involve trade agreements. There are rumors of a secret military coalition forming among some of the delegations. Against whom? Tai-Ho asked, his military instincts instantly alert. That's unclear. Possibly Earth, possibly my people, possibly both. My family has been investigating, but we found no concrete evidence yet. Tai-Ho felt his relaxed demeanor vanish, replaced by the focused vigilance that had kept him alive through 3 interstellar conflicts. So I'm not just playing husband. I'm walking into a potential military situation. Hana nodded, her markings dimming with concern. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you earlier. I feared you might refuse. I probably would have, Tai-Ho admitted. He looked down at the approaching city, its crystalline towers now clearly visible. But I'm here now. And I don't like the idea of Earth being threatened. The ship entered Stellarian airspace, joining a stream of diplomatic vessels converging on the central complex. Hana reached out to touch Tai-Ho's arm in the gesture of bonded pairs. Ready, husband? She asked softly. As ready as I'll ever be, he replied, placing his hand over hers. Tai-Ho stood tall beside Hana as they entered the grand hall of the Stellarian diplomatic complex. The massive chamber sparkled with crystalline architecture, illuminated by natural light that refracted through translucent ceiling panels. Delegates from 12 star systems mingled throughout the space, their diverse appearances and attire creating a living mosaic of interstellar diversity. "Remember," Hannah whispered, her hand positioned properly against his as they walked. "Speak only when addressed directly. Let me handle the political discussions." Taiho nodded almost imperceptibly. His military training had prepared him for high-pressure situations, but nothing quite like this. He scanned the room methodically, identifying potential exits and assessing the various delegations. The Kashians were easy to spot: tall, imposing figures with ridged heads and slate-gray skin, their formal attire reminiscent of armor rather than clothing. They gathered in a tight cluster, occasionally glancing toward the Earth-Stellarian couple with barely concealed suspicion. Ambassador Hannah called a melodious voice. A Stellarian male approached, his skin a deeper blue than Hannah's, with intricate markings that suggested high social status. "How fortunate that you made it in time." "Elder Jinho," Hannah replied with a formal bow. "May I present my bonded mate, Commander Taiho Park of Earth." The elder's gaze shifted to Taiho, assessing him with undisguised curiosity. "A human mate? How unexpected." "The House of Lumi has always valued tradition. We value strength and wisdom," Hannah countered smoothly. "Commander Park demonstrates both." "Indeed." Jinho's tone carried a hint of skepticism. "How convenient that your human mate appeared just in time for the summit, after your intended Stellarian partner disappeared so mysteriously." Taiho maintained his composed expression, but felt Hannah's fingers tense against his. This was clearly a challenge. "We've been together for some time." Taiho improvised, keeping his voice steady. "I was simply completing military duties before joining my mate for this important occasion." Jinho's markings pulsed with what might have been surprise at Taiho's direct response. "I see. Well, Commander, I hope you find our proceedings educational. Earth has much to learn about interstellar diplomacy." "I look forward to the experience," Taiho replied neutrally. As Jinho moved away, Hannah guided Taiho toward their assigned seating area. "Well handled," she murmured. "Jinho is my family's primary political rival. He would be pleased to see me fail." Throughout the morning, Taiho stood at Hannah's side as she navigated a complex web of introductions and preliminary discussions. He observed how different species interacted: the serpentine Sathi, who communicated through subtle body movements, the crystalline Luma, who seemed to shimmer with changing colors depending on their emotional state, and the mechanical organic hybrid mechs, who processed information with unnerving speed. When the formal opening ceremonies began, Taiho followed Hannah's lead, performing the ritual gestures she had taught him with reasonable accuracy. He noted with satisfaction that several delegates appeared impressed by a human's ability to adapt to Stellarian customs. During a brief recess, Hannah was called to a closed meeting with the Confederation's leading representatives. "Wait here," she instructed Taiho. "This shouldn't take long." Left alone at their table, Taiho maintained his diplomatic posture while carefully observing the room. His military training had included enhanced audio sensitivity implants, allowing him to filter and focus on specific conversations even in crowded spaces. He detected the deep, guttural tones of Kashian speech from a nearby alcove. Adjusting his focus, he listened carefully. "The human presence is unexpected," said one voice. "Could complicate matters." "Irrelevant," replied another. "The operation proceeds as planned. Once the treaty is sabotaged, their colonies will be isolated and vulnerable." And the Stellarian problem being addressed. Their support for the human expansion must end. The ambassador's mate was easily removed. She will be next if necessary. Taiho's face remained impassive, but his mind raced. They had just confirmed his suspicions. Hannah's original partner hadn't simply disappeared. And now both Earth and the Stellarians were targets of whatever operation the Kashians were planning. When Hannah returned, he maintained their formal appearance but whispered, "We need to talk privately. Soon." She gave him a questioning look but nodded slightly. "The welcome banquet is next. We'll have a moment before the main course." The banquet was held in an even larger hall, with floating platforms serving as tables for each delegation. Tahoe followed Hannah's example with the unfamiliar dining implements, managing to avoid any obvious cultural mistakes, despite the bewildering array of alien foods. During a musical interlude performed by hovering crystalline creatures, Hannah led Tahoe to a small garden terrace. "What's wrong?" she asked, her markings dimmed to reduce visibility. "I overheard Kashian delegates discussing an operation to sabotage the treaty," Tahoe explained quietly. "They specifically mentioned isolating Earth's colonies and ending Stellarian support. They also imply they've already removed your original partner." Hannah's markings pulsed with alarm. "This confirms my family's fears. We've suspected Kashian interference, but lacked proof." "Do you have security forces here?" Tahoe asked. "Yes, but they answer to the Confederation Council, which includes Kashian representatives. If we make accusations without evidence, we'll appear paranoid and desperate. Exactly what our opponents want." Tahoe considered this. "Then we need evidence, and we need to discover exactly what they're planning before it happens." Before Hannah could respond, another Stellarian approached the terrace. "Ambassador, your presence is requested for the ceremonial toast." "We'll continue this later," Hannah whispered to Tahoe as they returned to the banquet. The rest of the evening proceeded without incident, but Tahoe noticed increased attention from both the Kashian delegation and Jinho's faction. Their cover story was clearly being questioned. As they finally retired to their assigned quarters, a spacious suite befitting Hannah's diplomatic status, Tahoe felt the weight of their situation settling on him. This was no longer just about maintaining a pretense for Hannah's social standing. Earth's colonies and possibly the peace of multiple star systems were at stake. "Tomorrow," Hannah said as the door sealed behind them, "we must be even more convincing. The bonding recognition ceremony will test our performance as a mated pair." "What does that involve?" Tahoe asked warily. "Nothing intrusive," she assured him. "But it's a public demonstration of our connection. And it may be our best opportunity to gather information while all delegates are present." Tahoe nodded, his military mind already formulating strategies. "Then we'd better get some rest. Tomorrow could be decisive." As he settled into the separate sleeping chamber Hannah had discreetly arranged, Tahoe realized how quickly his simple agreement to help had evolved into a complex mission with serious implications. Whatever happened next, he was now fully committed to seeing it through, not just for Hannah, but for Earth's security. Tahoe woke before the artificial dawn programmed into their quarters. After years of military service, early rising was habit. He found Hannah already awake, reviewing documents on a translucent display that hovered above her desk. "You should have rested longer," she said without looking up. "Today will be demanding." "I function well on minimal sleep," Tahoe replied, accepting a cup of steaming liquid that resembled tea, but smelled faintly of cinnamon and something alien. "What's the schedule?" "The bonding recognition ceremony begins at mid-morning. Afterward, there's a security briefing for all delegates regarding protection protocols for the treaty signing tomorrow." Her markings pulsed with subtle anxiety. If the Kashians plan to sabotage the treaty, they'll likely act before tomorrow's signing. Tahoe sipped the tea-like drink, organizing his thoughts. "I need to investigate their delegation quarters." "Impossible," Hannah said firmly. "All residential areas are secured and monitored." "Not all security systems are foolproof," Tahoe noted. "During the ceremony, most attention will be elsewhere. It might provide our best opportunity." Before Hannah could object further, a chime announced a visitor. She quickly deactivated the display and composed herself. "Enter." A young Stellarian aide stepped inside, bowing respectfully. "Ambassador, Elder Jinho requests an immediate private audience regarding House Lumi matters." Hannah's markings flickered with surprise and concern. "At this hour?" "Very well. I'll join him shortly." Once the aide departed, Tahoe caught her arm. It could be a trap. Jinho is a political rival, not an assassin, Hannah replied, though uncertainty tinged her voice. Besides, this gives you time to prepare for the ceremony. Your formal attire is in the dressing chamber. After Hannah left, Taiho examined their quarters thoroughly, checking for surveillance devices with a small scanner he brought from Earth. Finding nothing obvious, he dressed in the elaborate formal wear laid out for him, a midnight blue suit with silver accents that complemented Stellarian aesthetic while maintaining Earth military styling. As he adjusted the unfamiliar garments, something about the prior evening's conversation nagged at him. The Kashians had mentioned the Stellarian problem specifically. Why target Hannah's people? The Stellarians were peaceful diplomats with limited military capacity, unless Taiho activated the room's information terminal, searching public records about Stellarian resources and territories. The answer came quickly. The Stellarian home system contained the galaxy's largest known deposits of quantum crystalline formations, the same material used in the most advanced faster-than-light drives and weapon systems. You didn't just choose me randomly, did you? Taiho asked the moment Hannah returned, her expression troubled from her meeting. She froze in the doorway, markings dimming. What do you mean? Your people control the galaxy's largest quantum crystal deposits. The Kashians want those resources for military expansion. Earth's Space Force is the only military that successfully resisted Kashian aggression. Taiho crossed his arms. You didn't pick me because I was convenient. You picked me because of my military background. Hannah's shoulders slumped slightly, her formal posture faltering. Not exactly. Then explain, Taiho demanded. You commanded Earth's defense against the Kashian incursion 5 years ago, she said quietly. You know their tactics, their weaknesses. My family suspected conspiracy for months but needed someone outside our political system to help investigate, someone the Kashians would recognize and fear. So this whole charade was partly diplomatic necessity and partly strategic planning, Hannah admitted. My family suspected that my original partner was taken to destabilize our position. We needed someone who could help uncover the plot while maintaining our diplomatic standing. Anger flashed through Taiho. You could have simply asked for my help directly. Would you have agreed to travel across the galaxy to investigate a conspiracy based on Stellarian political suspicions? Her markings pulsed with intensity. We needed you here, integrated into the summit in a way that gave you access without raising alarms. Before Taiho could respond, the room's communication system chimed urgently. Attention all delegates. The bonding recognition ceremony will commence in 30 minutes. All bonded pairs must report to the crystal atrium immediately for preliminary arrangements. Taiho took a deep breath, setting aside his frustration. This conversation isn't finished, but right now, we have a role to play. The crystal atrium lived up to its name, a vast dome of interconnected crystal facets that caught and amplified the light of Stellar's primed sun. 12 diplomatic pairs had gathered, representing each star system in the Confederation. Taiho and Hannah took their position as the sole Stellarian human couple. The ceremony is simple, Hannah whispered. We join hands in the traditional manner while reciting a brief pledge of unity. Then we must move through the light dance. Follow my lead and mirror my movements. Before Taiho could ask for clarification, musical tones filled the atrium as light began to dance through the crystal facets. Each pair stepped forward in turn to perform their bonding display. When their moment came, Hannah guided Taiho to the center of the atrium. They joined hands in the Stellarian manner, their third fingers touching. Hannah began reciting words in her native language, which Taiho repeated with careful attention to pronunciation. As they spoke, the crystal facets around them responded, creating patterns of light that swirled and pulsed. Then Hannah began to move in a slow, graceful sequence. Taiho mirrored her, finding the movements reminiscent of Tai Chi he had practiced during military training. Their joined movements caused the light patterns to intensify, creating a beautiful display that drew appreciative murmurs from the assembled delegates. As they completed the ceremony, Taiho noticed something unusual. The Kashian representatives were speaking urgently into communication devices, their usually composed expressions showing signs of agitation. The peaceful atmosphere shattered as alarms blared throughout the complex. Security officers rushed into the atrium, surrounding the delegates. "Attention," announced the chief security officer, a tall Stellarian with military markings. "We have detected unauthorized access to the treaty vault. All delegates must remain here under protection while we investigate." In the ensuing confusion, Taiho pulled Hana aside. "This is a diversion. Whatever they're planning, it's happening now." Hana's eyes widened. "How can you be sure?" "Military tactics. Create confusion in one area while executing your true objective elsewhere." Taiho glanced toward the Kashian delegation, noticing that several members had mysteriously disappeared during the chaos. "We need to move now." "Where?" "The communication hub. If they're coordinating an attack, that's where they'd need access." As security focused on protecting the gathered dignitaries, Taiho and Hana slipped away through a service corridor Hana knew from her previous diplomatic visits. They moved quickly through the complex, avoiding the main hallways where security would be concentrated. "If we're caught," Hana began. "We won't be," Taiho assured her, his military instincts fully engaged now. "But if my suspicions are correct, there's far more at stake than diplomatic embarrassment." They'd reached the communications center to find the entrance sealed but unguarded. Everyone had responded to the treaty vault alarm. Hana pressed her diplomatic access code into the panel, but it flashed red. "Override in effect," she whispered. "Someone's already inside." Taiho examined the door mechanism. "Can you access the emergency protocols? Every secure facility has them." Hana nodded, touching a hidden panel that revealed a secondary access system. The door slid open silently. Inside, 3 Kashian officers worked frantically at the main communication array. On their screens, Taiho recognized military deployment coordinates, targeting Earth's outlying colonies and Stellarium mining operations. "Stop!" Taiho shouted, charging forward. The Kashians whirled, drawing weapons. The leading officer smiled coldly. "Too late, human. The attack orders are already transmitted." Taiho assessed the situation in an instant. 3 armed Kashians at the controls, transmission already sent, and Hana behind him unarmed. The odds were poor, but he had faced worse during the Proxima Centauri defense. "Maybe," Taiho acknowledged calmly, "but transmission doesn't mean reception." The lead Kashian's gray face twisted in confusion. Taiho used that moment of hesitation to move, diving toward the nearest console while shouting to Hana, "Emergency lockdown protocol." Hana reacted immediately, slapping her hand against a crystal panel on the wall. Strobing lights filled the room as security barriers descended, sealing them all inside the communication center. The Kashians fired their weapons, but Taiho had already rolled behind a databank. He reached for his boot where he had concealed a small Earth military device, a signal disruptor designed for emergency situations. "You cannot stop what has already begun," the Kashian leader hissed. "Our forces are mobilizing at jump points near your colonies. Without Stellarian support, Earth will stand alone and fall." Taiho activated the disruptor, which emitted a high-pitched whine as it scrambled all outgoing signals from the room. "Your transmission is being corrupted now, and Earth never stands alone." The Kashians realized what was happening and rushed toward him. Taiho met the first one with a combat move perfected in low-gravity training, using the attacker's momentum to send him crashing into a bank of equipment. Hana surprised everyone by grabbing a metal rod from a broken panel and swinging it at the second Kashian, striking him across the shoulders. The lead Kashian reached the main terminal and tried to override the disruption. "You're too late. Secondary transmissions are already routing through backup channels." Alarms blared throughout the complex as security forces responded to the lockdown. Taiho grappled with the remaining Kashian guard, while Hana worked frantically at another terminal. "I'm accessing the emergency broadcast system," she called out. If we can send a warning to all systems simultaneously. The lead Kashian abandoned his terminal and lunged for Hannah, weapon raised. Taiho broke free from his opponent and threw himself between them, taking a glancing hit from the energy weapon across his shoulder. The pain was intense, but he managed to knock the weapon aside and drive the Kashian back. Transmission ready, Hannah shouted over the alarms. Send it, Taiho grunted, still struggling with the Kashian leader. Hannah's fingers flew across the controls as she activated the emergency system. Every communication device in 12 star systems received the same urgent message. Warning: unauthorized military action in progress. All defensive systems activate. Authentication code: Stellarian High Council emergency override. Security forces finally breached the sealed room, flooding in with weapons drawn. They quickly subdued the Kashian agents while medical staff attended to Taiho's injury. We need to address the council immediately, Hannah insisted to the security chief. We have evidence of a conspiracy to sabotage the peace treaty and launch attacks on multiple worlds. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Emergency sessions were convened, evidence was presented, and urgent messages were dispatched to military commands throughout Confederated space. The Kashian plot had been extensive. Sleeper ships positioned near vulnerable colonies, bribed officials ready to disable defense systems, and a carefully orchestrated diplomatic crisis designed to fracture alliances. Thanks to Hannah's warning, defensive fleets were mobilized in time. The Kashian attack ships were intercepted before they could reach their targets. Reports came in from across the galaxy confirming that the immediate threat had been neutralized. By evening, the diplomatic chamber had been transformed into an emergency council chamber. Delegates from 11 star systems faced the disgraced Kashian representatives, who had been placed under guard. Taiho stood tall despite his bandaged shoulder as Hannah addressed the assembly. His military uniform had been repaired, and he wore it proudly now, no longer pretending to be something he wasn't. The evidence is irrefutable, Hannah stated, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. The Kashian military faction planned to destroy this summit and blame Earth, triggering an interstellar war that would allow them to seize control of key resource systems. The head of the Confederation Council, an elderly Xathi delegate, uncoiled to his full height. We have reviewed the communication logs and security recordings. Ambassador Hannah speaks truth. The treaty must now be amended to address this betrayal. Taiho stepped forward. If I may address the council. After receiving permission, he continued, this incident demonstrates that isolation makes us all vulnerable. Earth has maintained distance from Confederation affairs, but perhaps that time has ended. We are stronger together than apart. The chamber fell silent as delegates considered his words. Then, one by one, they signaled agreement. Thanks to my husband's actions, Hannah said, the term no longer feeling like a pretense, we've averted conflict and preserved the alliance. I formally propose that Earth be invited to join the Confederation as a full member, with Commander Park serving as interim representative until your government can appoint an official ambassador. The Council voted overwhelmingly in favor of the proposal. As the emergency session concluded, delegates approached Taiho and Hannah to express gratitude and welcome. Later, in a quiet moment on a balcony overlooking the crystalline city, Taiho and Hannah stood side by side watching the sunset paint the structures in brilliant colors. Your shoulder, does it still pain you? Hannah asked, her markings glowing with concern. It will heal, Taiho assured her. Your people have impressive medical technology. You saved my life in that control room, she said quietly, and possibly saved millions more across our worlds. Taiho smiled slightly. You did the same. We make a good team. About that, Hannah turned to face him fully. My people need an Earth liaison, someone who understands both worlds and has proven themselves trustworthy. Her markings pulsed with what he now recognized as nervousness. The position would be permanent, requiring regular travel between our planets. Are you proposing a job or something more? Taiho asked with a slight smile, remembering their pretend marriage that somehow felt less pretend after all they had been through. Perhaps both, Hannah replied, her markings glowing brightly as she extended her hand in the traditional Stellarian gesture of bonded pairs. In time, if you're willing to explore that possibility. Taiho reached out, touching his third finger to hers in the proper manner. I think my solitary days at that remote outpost were coming to an end anyway. The galaxy seems to have other plans for me. As they stood together watching the alien sunset, Taiho realized that his reluctant agreement to help a desperate alien woman had led to something he hadn't expected to find again after retiring from service: a purpose, a connection, and perhaps even a new beginning. 3 days, he mused aloud. You promised I'd be back at my outpost in 3 days. I did, Hannah acknowledged with a subtle flicker of amusement in her markings. Does that timeline still stand? Taiho looked out at the shimmering city, then back to Hannah. I think I can spare a few more days. The outpost will wait. Together they turned back toward the diplomatic complex, where representatives of 12 worlds, soon to be 13, continued the work of building a stronger alliance, forged in crisis but promising a more secure future for all.